the Wizard of Moscow, as perhaps we should now call him, this silly fool, I think he's been very badly exposed.
He doesn't survive this.
And I can't see them getting Kursk back. I can't see Putin surviving a war inside Russia.
Hello. Our guest this week on The Edge is actually somebody I've already interviewed on my channel, journalist John Sweeney. And if you don't know John, he is a veteran journalist with many, many years working at the BBC. He traveled the world and interviewed many notables, including Donald J. Trump, or in Russia, the philosopher, in quotation marks, Alexander Dugin. He even doorstepped Vladimir Putin once, for which he got a swift punch to the ribs for his troubles. His latest book is about the murdered Russian dissident Alexei Navalny. We talk about that and so much more. Now keep in mind, this is a rather informal and comfortable conversation because John and I happen to be friends. So, take a look.
Well, John, good to see you again, mate. You've got a new book out, and it is primarily talking about Navalny, Alexei Navalny, and his final days. Do you want to talk a little bit about that narrative without giving too much away from the book?
No, I'm very happy to. All of my Ukrainian friends hate it that I've written this book about this dreadful man, Alexei Navalny, and it's called Alexei Navalny. It's called Murder in the Gulag: The Life and Death of Alexei Navalny. And I set out the evidence, I think, which is strong, is that Putin had him murdered. Quite how, we don't know, but he was very healthy, cracking jokes, very healthy for somebody who'd been in the Gulag, in the Slammer, in the Kula for the best part of 3 years. But the day before he died, he was cracking jokes his jailers in the Arctic Wolf Penal Colony, and you've got a clue there, Phil, that it's not a nice place to hang out.
No.
Laughed at his wit. And remember, he's, public enemy number one, and they were sufficiently amused by his wit that they found themselves laughing. These are the jailers from the Arctic North. And the next day he's dead. Mm. Therefore, what happened? I think he was murdered. I think he was poisoned. I got hold of an intelligence source from former Western intelligence officer who got in touch with contacts in Russia in the Russian dark state. And the view of my friend's source was that Putin had cooked this up with Bortnikov, the head of the FSB, the new name for the KGB, back in December. And there was a plan to have Navalny killed, and around about Valentine's Day, that was kind of actioned. Navalny probably dies on February the 15th, according to prison gossip. The authorities say he's dead on the 16th. Putin likes our anniversary, so I think he may well have said, let's do it on Valentine's Day. But there are a lot of fascinating questions about them, and I met him. By the way, I don't know if your regular viewers and listeners know that the reason I'm wearing this silly orange hat, is because during the Battle of Kyiv, the Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian police, were a bit jumpy. The Russians were 12 miles away. They had every reason to be so. But this saved my life, apart from on the second day when I was arrested for being a Russian spy. And I actually said to the guy who arrested me, do I look like a Russian spy? Anyway, that's kind of why I wear this hat.
Yeah,
but it's
well, it reminds me of the old the joke of the story of at the Battle of Arnhem, the guy the British soldier carrying the Brawley
Yes.
who would because no German soldier would ever run around with a Brawley.
Yes.
Yes. And he's very distinctive.
For Ukrainian.
And I tease you about your lovely ego, but that it's very characteristic and it defines you, John. It defines you.
But it's August out there, so I'm going to take this off.
Okay, go ahead and take that off.
So anyway, the thing about Navalny is that many, many Ukrainians and a good number of Russian liberals don't like him because of two things. First of all is that in 2007 to 2010, he went on they're called Russian marches, which are basically marches of not just the right, not just the conservative right, not just Tsarists, but people close to the Russian version of the KKK. And he had a flirtation with the far right in Russia for 3 years.
Yeah.
During the course of which he did two really horrible racist videos about Chechens and Dagestanis. These are the Muslims who live in Russia's deep south, which were horrible, comparing Muslims to cockroaches. Secondly, 2014, when the Russians move in and invade Ukraine for the first time, they take Crimea and they take great big bites out of two counties in the east, Donetsk and Luhansk. They, when asked about this, Navalny said, "Hey, is Crimea like a sausage sandwich that you can, once you can't switch it around like this? I.e., if the Russians have got it, the Russians are going to keep it, aren't they?" And later on, when he went back to Russia, he was locked up, and then the big war started. And he said, "Listen, this is wrong, completely wrong.
Yeah,
and Russia must.
I do remember that.
Russia must respect the '91 borders." However, the problem is when the spotlight was really on him in 2014, he said exactly the wrong thing for Ukrainians, and when he was locked up and the spotlight was nowhere near him because of the big war in Ukraine and everybody was worried about whether Ukraine could make it, whether it could survive, then Navalny said exactly the right thing, by which point no one was listening. So I've written a book which stands up for him and says that he is a knight in dented armor, but he's a knight nevertheless. I met him twice, the first time in Strasbourg, and basically he's coming over to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg to make the case, and Russia was a member at that time, to make the case that he had been unfairly dealt with because he'd been blocked from running for president on the basis of a nonsense conviction. And I was working on a film for Panorama, and he had 5 minutes before he took his plane, and I was desperate to get a soundbite from him because I might not be let into Russia. And I was with my great pal, Seamus McCracken, who's a wonderful BBC cameraman. And I said, and Seamus is putting on our sound mics, and we've got no time. And I said, Alexei, Seamus is from Northern Ireland. Seamus stops work. And then I go, "I'm terribly sorry. Seamus is from the north of the island of Ireland." Because Seamus is very proud of seeing... Anyway, he's a very proud Irishman from the north of the island.
From the north of Ireland.
Yeah, and yes. Not Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And so... instantly, Alexei is enormously charismatic. And instantly, his face lit up. And he said to Seamus, "Are you sure you want to work with this British imperialist?" and
of course, now, no, sorry. One of the main things, the criticisms of Navalny is that despite his opposition to Putin, he is still a Russian imperialist. That's what a Ukrainian will tell you.
Yes. Now, so this is very, very... listen, I'll finish the story.
Yeah, no. What did Seamus have to say?
And then we're going to hit... So anyway, so Seamus laughed, and then he said, "No, it's okay," because he'd made his point, and then I got my soundbite. But afterwards, Alexei went back to Russia. Seamus and I went for a drink, and as we sat drinking our beers in Strasbourg, Seamus looked at me and he said, filming you, Sweeney, filming you and Navalny was like filming two big dogs sniff each other's bottoms.
Well, my only encounter with Navalny, and I didn't have direct interaction with him, but I was in his proximity during the Bolotnaya Square protests, which came about right after the switch between Putin and Medvedev.
Yes, by the way, I like the phrase on Medvedev. There's a wonderful chap called Donald Rayfield, who's a retired professor of Russian at London University. I said, "What do you make of Medvedev?" And he said, "Al Capone's lawyer."
Yes, right. Yes.
So for people who don't know, what happens is the Russians used to have two-term rule, just like the Americans. I don't know why you people don't have a monarchy. Anyway, so Putin starts in 2000, first term 2004, second term 2004 to 8. At that point, Putin can no longer be president.
That's right.
What happens is he then switches with Al Capone's
placeholder.
With Al Capone's lawyer, who, by the way, is the only guy in the Kremlin who's actually shorter than Putin. That's the reason he gets his job. And then he's super loyal and shorter. What's not to like?
Yeah.
And then in 2012, they switch back.
Yeah.
And this pisses everybody off in Moscow. And Navalny leads the protests.
Well, that's my point, is when I was in Bolotnaya Square, which was also called the White Ribbon Revolution, I didn't meet Navalny personally, but I was an eyewitness to what was one of his greatest strengths, which was organizing the people. He was extremely good at bringing people together from different opposition groups, getting them all in one place, all organized with the prior work that was needed to be done to not just show up on the square on the day, but also to kind of like promote this, these meetings they used to call them. So he was a extraordinary organizer of a very limited resource in Russia that is an opposition.
But he really fought, and he fought very hard. So I think we should grasp the Ukrainian nettle that there's no point to Navalny or any of the others because they're all Russian imperialists.
Yeah, well, the recent argument about Karamurza, for example.
So, by the way, I championed Karamurza. There was a meeting organised by Sir Bill Browder, in London at the RAC, and I was invited to speak along with many other people, and I said, get him out. Mm-hmm. And I'm very glad
thankfully
that the Americans did get him out. Now that he's out, I've actually been invited to a second meeting where we're all there to raise a glass to him, and I will, having said get him out, I kind of now want to say shut up, because what he's saying is, the problem is that I don't think ordinary Russians or even extraordinary Russians, and both Navalny and Karamurza and Ilyich, all of them are brave. Anybody,
no doubt.
They are brave and good. But the problem is that their view of the world is too Russo-centric.
Yes.
And I give, and they do not understand the loss, the awful loss that the Ukrainians are suffering. I'm part of I love Ukraine. I love coming here. But this trip, I think, has been one of the most, of all of my times in Ukraine, this has been one of the most depressing because I've been away for 7 months. And so for example, I was visiting a friend in a central Ukrainian town, and there is a pedestrianised street where there is a war memorial, or rather a series of black and white photographs in squares, and on each part of the square there is a photograph of a dead Ukrainian soldier. Mm-hmm. And what's happened is, and I was there last year, and this year they have advanced this procession across onto the continuing street, but on the other side of the road. And now that it's not squares, it's octagons. And it just goes on and on and on. And to stand, you can sit in a cafe and watch mothers and wives with their kids come leave flowers. And this is just one small town, but it is happening across the whole country.
Yes.
And it's hard. You can spend quite a lot of time in Kyiv, and I've just been to the beach in Odessa as well. And you don't really get it because there are other things going on in the capital. And
it's a different atmosphere, yeah, absolutely.
But in the sticks, you feel a sense of the depth of the loss. And the problem is, I think there are two. I do think there is a difference between being Russo-centric and being a Russian imperialist. So that, but there is a problem with the mindset. It kind of like talking to people in Britain in the 30s who don't get it that the empire's over.
100%. I agree with you 100%.
By the way, but that doesn't mean that these people are bad.
No.
And also, and this is something I absolutely believe in, that I don't think that the West is going to give Ukraine the right amount of material to militarily defeat Russia. So I think the war stops when one of the two sides breaks down. And weirdly, I think Ukraine is internally stronger and more coherent and has got less, although Russia is far richer, I think that it is more likely that the war will stop when Russia falls apart, where the stresses on Russia make it fall apart.
As the great Yale professor Timothy Snyder puts it, that it might be better for Russia to lose a war of empire. He's made the point that all empires actually benefit from a loss of a imperial war. And so it might, however it shakes out, whatever the defeat finally is for Russia, because inevitably Russia is going to lose this war. It can't win. It doesn't have the capacity to take Kharkiv or Odessa or not least of which.
It could take. Well, maybe it could take Kharkiv. But for the moment, we've seen.
But it won't. But it won't. Look, its imperial interests are lost here.
Yes,
they have lost Ukraine forever. Yes. And to finish Snyder's point, which gels with what we're talking about, this concept of self as empire, which defines even the opposition because it's so deeply ingrained in their sense of who they are, that by losing an imperial war and shattering that sense of self as empire, ultimately even the empire itself benefits.
Yes, but my argument with my Ukrainian friends is, yes, I get it. These people still believe in Greater Russia, in some kind of Russian imperialism, but they are to be cherished because they're standing up to Putin, and Navalny in particular, his two great videos. And he made many of them, and they're brilliant. And I go into them in great detail. But the two standout ones where it's not a video, it's a great Oscar-winning film, the Navalny, which is about the poisoning of it. And if people haven't seen it, go watch it. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful, wonderful film about just how fucking stupid the Russian secret police are.
Yeah.
And
when he dupes them.
It's Chris. He pokes fun of them and him and the gang. There's a wonderful character who's on Twitter, and everybody must follow him, called Christo Grossev. And in my book, Murder in the Gulag, I call Christo Grossev the Bulgarian Sherlock Holmes, and he is. I mean, he is a wonderful internet sleuth, and he manages by using Russian corruption against itself. He goes onto the Russian black market, the internet, the grey market, whatever, on the internet, uses Bitcoin to buy completely illegally, but you can get hold of this stuff in Russia. Fantastic sources of information. One of them is flight manifests. Mm-hmm. A second is a weird app or piece of information which lists telephone numbers and what people on other people's phones call their contacts. So one of the people, at one point, Grosso puts in FSB doctor on the phone app and comes up with a number. He then checks this number against an app or a database. It's more like a database of telephone numbers and passport numbers and addresses. And then he finds, and he's got some of this stuff from before, from other investigations. And so he can then isolate. So this doctor he's a scientist, he's a chemical weapons expert, and he works in the FSB in this particular building, and he's identified the FSB poison squad. He then checks this guy, and guess what? He trails Navalny around Siberia when Navalny is poisoned.
Mm-hmm.
It's a perfect match. But watch the film. There's a moment when Navalny prank calls the poison squad.
Yeah.
And the guys who follow him around all the time are utterly familiar with him. And so the moment he pretends to be, and it's so cool, Phil, he pretends to be an aide to Nikolai Patrushev.
Yes.
Who's this
The head of the Security Council.
Oh, he stepped down now. He stepped away.
At the time, though.
Yeah, but he was, and he's a sort of psychotic hawk.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of, he makes Dr. Strangelove seem normal and sweet.
Very, very disturbed.
He's a disturbed psychotic twat who shares. He not only shares Vladimir Putin's worldview, he makes it darker and even madder and more Soviet-friendly.
Yeah.
So this guy who Navalny is playing is Petrushev's sort of maitre d' or consigliere or something like this.
His right-hand man.
And he barks.
Yes.
But most
knowing full well what's so glorious about that phone call, not to give too much away, but what's glorious about that is that he's already employing the psychology of intimidation and hierarchical power and bullying that exists within the Russian government.
So Navalny perfectly mimics
it's so smart.
the mannerism of a Kremlin high-up bullying some miserable killer. You know, the common murderer, murderers.
Over like receipts and stuff. Well, who gave authorization for this?
Yes.
You know?
It's that kind of thing.
It is genius.
And he collars one of the poison.
And funny, too. I mean,
it's gloriously funny.
Yes.
By the way, so Grozov, the Bulgarian Sherlock Holmes, he tells a story in the documentary of the head, I think, of the GRU, or a senior head, Russian military intelligence, whose email account was hacked, and his first passport was Moscow 1. And he's hacked again, he changes it to Moscow 2. Hacked again, changes it to Moscow 3. And hacked again and changes it to Moscow 4. And so what Grozov says, there's a moment when they're thinking about whether this prank will work. And Navalny says, I don't think it's going to work. And Grozov looks at him and just goes, Moscow 4, Moscow 4. And that's the name, the title of one of my chapters. But then, and it's so glorious, he pretends to be Petrushev's consigliere. And he just bullies this guy, and one of the lowlier murderers, who is a scientist who's a chemical weapons expert who sort of cooks the poison rather than administers it. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't know Navalny's voice like the actual poisoners do. Mm-hmm. He's the kind of cleanup guy. And the poor fucker has got COVID. So that he is, and
out
it's
of sorts,
and it's 6:30, and then there's Petrushev's guy who's kind of barking at him, and he just gives up stuff, and Grozov is going like this, and Maria Pevchik, who is part of the gang and a brilliant investigative journalist and part of Team Navalny, she is she's like this as well. And
Yeah, 'cause who could think these guys are that stupid?
yeah, Moscow 4. Moscow 4.
Yeah.
And then, so what was the guy tried, I can't talk about, what was the mechanism? I can't talk about this. He's got a bad, it's COVID. I can't talk about this on the phone. I've got to write this report now. What was the...
But you don't understand. I have to have my Form 22B in by Monday, and if I don't have it in by Monday, I'm going to catch hell. And if I catch hell, you're going to catch hell.
It was on the underpants.
It's the underpants.
Where on the underpants?
Yes.
It was the seam of the underpants, the crotch. What colour were the underpants? Blue. And then the
I mean, I shouldn't laugh. It's deadly serious, but it's just so
Navalny puts the phone
surreal.
Navalny puts the phone down, and Grozov says, "They're going to kill him." And they, I listen.
I mean, not to be glib, but I mean, yes. I mean, it's gallows humor, but it is.
But that's true.
Very serious.
But at the same time, it is a brilliant investigation into the stupidity of the Russian dark state.
Yeah.
And watch that film. And then the second film is Putin's Palace.
Yeah, the Medusa collaboration he did where he revealed the decadence and the abuse.
And there was there's a kind of gold.
The opulence.
There's a
obscene.
gold toilet roll holder, a toilet cleaner, toilet brush holder, gold, made of gold, $700. And 120 million people have watched this.
Yeah.
So when my Ukrainian friends, who I love and admire, say, he's just another Russian fascist. No, he's not.
No.
Yes, he's Russo-centric. Yes, he believes in a greater Russia. Yes, you can call him a Russian imperialist. However, he was saying something that there is, absolutely clearly, with a wonderfully powerful voice, there was something rotten inside the Kremlin from Putin down, and exposing that rottenness was both extraordinarily brave and good in the long term, because ordinary Russians will be able to come to terms with I think in the future, with the disaster that Putin represents. And they've also got to say to themselves, well, actually, we were told. Now, it cuts both ways. I also feel a little bit about Navalny is that he's a bit like von Stauffenberg. And von Stauffenberg was a Nazi, stopped being a Nazi, or who woke up from
still a very patriotic German.
Patriotic is almost being polite, but he tried to kill Hitler.
Right.
And the idea that all Germans went along with what Hitler was doing. No, there were people who wanted to say, stop this. Yeah. Stop this because we're losing, but also stop this because it's fucking wrong.
Right. Well,
and Navalny is a bit like that.
The problem with what we see in Russian opposition, generally, almost exclusively, but still, is that you are born into empire, and your concept of your country is empire, and that's going to be a long time divesting itself from even the opposition.
Well, I was born in '58,
right?
Okay, but
as a Brit, as a former subject of the world's largest empire, as a former colonial and also Brit, I will say, who also struggles with concept of empire.
But we
have a very different perspective on it because it's in our rearview mirror, sort of. Yes. Well, I mean, the American empire being what it is, but it's a very different beast.
We got over it. But
yes.
we actually got over it in part because although we won the Second World War, it broke us financially. Mm-hmm. And also, I think it opened our eyes to a different kind of world, whereas at least the kind of feudal caste system, which kind of overlaid British society and British democracy, was broken, and ordinary people, and in particular ordinary soldiers who fought for the country, who saved the country, airmen and sailors too. But they realised that there is a new future, which is democratic, which was Labour government, all of that stuff. But part of that awakening, part of that new, fresh realization, was that the empire is old rubbish and we need to get on.
Yeah.
We need to get on. And the idea, for example, so many Indians died, both in Europe and in the fighting the Japanese, that India had earned its spurs and it should be free.
Yeah.
And then once you'd made that decision, then getting rid of Africa and and all of that.
Well, and ultimately it leads to Suez and all the rest. And then also from the other side of perspective, because you and I joke about my being both British and American, having kind of.
You seem American to me.
I know you.
Sorry, but that's...
You're utterly wrong. But nevertheless, I have a leg in both lands. But I do understand this sense of empire in a Western perspective. Look, Americans may have an empire, but they are very uncomfortable with it. They don't like concept of empire. Britain has abandoned empire, and even those desperately clinging on to the concept of empire, they're already living in the past. The difference is with Russia, they're still very comfortable with the concept of empire. In fact, they are pro-empire. They want a restoration of their empire.
Well, this is an empire which doesn't actually speak its name, because essentially everybody in Russia is Russia. No, that's not true. I mean, it's a massive polygon.
It's conquest.
But so I feel anyway. So I guess that the Russian opposition have a Russian imperialist mindset, but there is a massive difference between the killer in the Kremlin and someone like Alexei Navalny, who dreamt of a different kind of Russia, a beautiful new Russia, another Russia, and I share that dream and I share that hope.
As do I, ultimately. I think it's going to be a difficult thing to be done. But it lets me circle around to another topic, away from your wonderful book, which people obviously should go and buy and read. But
unless you're Ukrainian.
Perhaps. But it lets me just circle around to another topic, which, generally we don't do hard news here on the podcast. We kind of like to talk about more comprehensive things. But this is such a significant event in the course of this war that it will be reflected on, and not to use a perhaps ill chosen idiom, but the Rubicon has been crossed. The river's been crossed when we talk about what has recently happened with Ukraine's incursion into Russian territory in the oblast of Kursk.
It's not an incursion.
Invasion, incursion, seizures, special military operation.
It's a special military operation.
Yes, indeed. I've heard Ukrainians turning that on its nose and using it. But what I think is interesting about this invasion...
So the point is, the moment you mention Kursk, Ukrainians just start giggling, and so there is, one of my pals who's a Ukrainian soldier has said, I've been on a holiday to Russia. It's great. You don't need a passport these days. And then I kind of, what? I know where you've been. And then don't ask me anything more. I said, what was it like? And he said, well, it was cool, so this is. So let's remember that Ukraine is paying a terrible price in blood. The war has been going miserably for Ukraine for about longer than a year since the failure.
It's been bogged down in
and Ukraine. So the point is, where Russia turns the war into a meat grinder, Russia wins. And Ukraine has not been able to do a fast war of maneuver. Bingo. Suddenly it has.
Yeah.
And by the way, Oliver Carroll, my friend who writes for The Economist, has written this piece saying one of the factors for success is Ukrainians didn't tell the West. They kept it stumm. They kept it quiet. Because last time the West leaked too much of it, everybody knew it was all over, and the Russians were waiting for them, and they got clobbered. This time, they kept it super quiet, and they succeeded I think they could have gone way further. The problem of going way further is the Russians could bite them. But at the moment, well, what it's now it's close to 2 weeks, and the Russians still have not turned up in force, and the Ukrainians are blowing up bridges, which makes it much more difficult for the Russians to actually knock them out. I mean, they can put up a whole load of artillery and smash away, but even so, the Ukrainians are going to hunker down, I think.
Yeah, and make them fight over their own territory,
which is different
instead of fighting for Ukrainian territory.
And Vladimir Putin is humiliated.
Yes.
So
and again, playing back into the sense of empire, to have what they consider to be their little colonial, lesser partner in a colonial imperial relationship, to be on the offensive into their own territory. That's shattering.
Yes, it's shattering. Listen, I mean, there is, all sorts of. Britain's got all sorts of problems, and there are the far-right politicians are saying our country, far too many immigrants or whatever. You invade any part of the United Kingdom and there'd be trouble. Where I live in South London, I'm just advising there are parts of South London, Mr. Putin, I'd really advise you not to invade. But any part, the locals, whoever they are, would kick the Russians, would have a real go.
Brits being Brits, they will take the piss out of one another. But the second you come and attack, there would be.
I find it
a unified front.
There were absolutely, even Clacton. So I find
even Grimsby,
all of the places that voted for reform, that voted for Brexit, all of those places, actually probably in particular those places, would really have a go. Fuck off.
Yeah.
And what's astonishing, and I actually say this to my Ukrainian friends, is this feels like the only honest opinion poll of Putin's power there's been for the last 24 years. And it doesn't look good, mate. Because nobody locally has said, we must, we're going to fight the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
They're not bothering. By the way, there was another second opinion poll, which is when Prigozhin last summer invaded Russia. Obviously, he's part of the Wagner army, but nevertheless, there is a mutiny, and nobody in Rostov-on-Don tries to stop him. He gets very close, within 140 miles of Moscow, something like this.
Right on the outskirts.
Yeah, well, not quite the outskirts, but not far off. And nobody challenges. And then there's some moment I speculate that somebody, the KGB, the FSB, got to Prigozhin's grandchildren or something like this, and he stops for whatever reason. But both times, Prigozhin's mutiny and now the Ukrainian special military operation, the Russians don't give a tuppenny damn about standing by the killer in the Kremlin.
The soldiers are grabbing everything that isn't nailed down, and the apparatchiks and the government officials, they're grabbing everything that isn't nailed down in the advance of the Ukrainians and then pissing off.
They run away.
The locals are grabbing their valuables and taking off as well, or waiting for the Ukrainians.
Quite a lot of
patiently.
Quite a lot of state. Right. But the other thing my pal was saying is what the Russians did do is they started looting all the shops. Not the Ukrainians.
No.
The Russians who stayed started looting the shops. But apart from sort of stealing stuff from their friends and neighbours, there's no hostility.
No.
And they were doing checks. What they wanted to know is, let's have a look at your passport. If you're local, fine. If you're not local, you might be a soldier. So it's a fair question. But actually, when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was dozens and dozens and dozens of little videos of Ukrainian tractor drivers stealing tanks, of people on motorbikes, people throwing stones, everything.
Yeah.
Nothing like it.
No. Washing machines, they were grabbing everything.
So I think that the meat grinders continuing in Donetsk, Ukrainians are in real trouble there, and that Pokrovsk,
Yes.
that's all going to happen. But remember, Ukraine is vast. But in terms of international humiliation, Putin has got a real problem. And for the moment,
Yeah.
he's casting it as an internal matter, and that there's no proper focus. But there is a real, even inside a dictatorship like Putin's, there is a degree of public opinion, and the public needs to be told a story that makes some kind of sense.
Yes.
And at the moment, none of that is happening, which is why, like my Ukrainian friends, I'm giggling.
Well, yes, and also you bring up a very good point. With I think is worth repeating, in that you see Ukrainian territory that has been taken by Russian armed forces, and it is devastated because the Ukrainians fight for every single inch of territory. So they, in the process of withdrawing, they fight for everything, and they leave very little in their,
there's nothing
left because they fight so far.
Yeah.
But you look at Ukrainian troops moving through Kursk, and hardly anything has been, certainly not devastated, because they're not putting up a fight, because the fight isn't in them. The fight is in Ukraine, and so you can see the result in the east. The fight is not in the Russians, which is why they're maneuvering through almost pristine villages.
Yeah, and they've blown up 3 bridges.
Yes.
The significance of this is, and it's weird, unless you've been a war reporter or an army officer, it's hard to understand. But actually, bridges and things are vitally important. Until you build a bridge, it takes it forever to go around the river. And so all of this land, and the Ukrainians aren't even there yet, but they're blowing up bridges. And what that means is that the Russians who are further toward, are on the wrong side of the bridge towards the Ukrainians, have now got a problem in that they can't get a road back to their resupply routes. So they're going to run out of ammo and food and water, and it's hot. So what are they going to do? Well, they're going to reverse. And so if you take these the 3 bridges that they've blown up, that space is way bigger than what they've currently got. Within the space that they've won, somebody's revving a motorbike in a moronic way. Within the space that they've got, there are two very interesting points, which will further alarm Russia and Russia's backers, the Chinese in particular. The first of which is that, what's the town called, which is it's where the gas metering plant is. In Suja.
There's Suja. Yes,
it's in Suja. Yep, just trying to pronounce it correctly. So the gas metering plant is the one pipeline that's left. Somebody blew up the one in the sea. Who knows? Which Ukrainian? No. Anyway, I don't.
Funny
really
how
care.
that's reared its head.
Yeah, I don't care. I don't.
No, I don't either. And I do find it interesting that it's suddenly become a topic of conversation while the incursion into Kursk is happening. I don't think that's a coincidence.
So they've got the gas metering station. And what this means is this is a pipeline which is actually going through Ukraine, and Ukraine gets money from allowing the gas to pass. I know it sounds bonkers, but that's been happening. And also, Ukraine takes some of that gas to power itself. And then it ends up in Hungary and Austria and Slovakia. And certainly Hungary and Slovakia are now more or less on Team Russia, or in Team Russia, more or less. So if the Russians try and take back this gas metering plant, it's quite possible that a shell could blow it up. Or it could be blown up accidentally, or it could be blown up accidentally.
Right.
But either way, that's the end of that pipeline. So the Russians have got a real problem. How do they take back this thing, which they don't want to blow up? By the way, the Ukrainians, it's pure joy, because if they cut the pipe on the Ukrainian side, then they're liable for all sorts of international penalties because they're behaving badly. So they might be financial, but that might not work. But nevertheless, there are people in the West who say, what the fuck are you doing that for? Well, if the Russians blow up their own pipeline, that's not our fault, son, is it?
Yeah.
You can imagine that happening. The second thing is they don't have it, but the Kursk nuclear power station is now in easy artillery range of Ukrainian fire. Now, I'm not suggesting for a second that Ukrainians will blow this up, but down in the south of Ukraine, in Russian-occupied territory, is Europe's biggest nuclear reactor. 6 massive nuclear kettles, which was supplying power to nearly an awful lot of Ukraine. All the kettles have been switched off. The Russian occupiers have got it. There are Ukrainian technicians who work like slaves there. It's a grim place. And everybody is afraid of nuclear blackmail by the Russians. Yeah, Zaporizhzhia. What now happens, because the Ukrainians can hit Kursk if they wish to from inside their Russian incursion, or their incursion into Russia, is you've got something of a Mexican standoff.
Yeah.
And that it's not perfect, but if I'm the Kremlin, I don't fuck with Zaporizhzhia because I'd be afraid of what might happen in Kursk.
Well, it changes so many different dynamics. But I mean, ultimately, and all of these things are strategically, tactically worth mentioning. But the thing that really does get it for me is this fact that the Ukrainians have taken the fight to Russia,
yes,
which is devastating for Putin because Putin is ultimately living on borrowed time. His so much of his cachet, and you've met the man, you know the deal. It's all about his persona as a great, powerful leader, and if you can chip away at that, it's going to go a long way towards. I mean, he could be. I mean, it's Nicholas II when he took control of the armed forces in the First World War, and ultimately led to his downfall.
I was thinking of somebody in more recent history, closer to Nicholas in time, the Wizard of Oz. When he blows into the machinery and then the little dog Toto pulls away back the curtain and you see this whole fool puffing and blowing.
Yeah.
But I'm all of us must concentrate on how does Beijing look at this? And so there's a story in the FT that the Chinese are now paying far less. They've made a decision to cut the amount of money they're giving to Russia for oil and gas. They're reducing that money. Putin's just gone to Azerbaijan, and you only go there. You only go there you don't go there for the beach. You go there for oil and gas.
Right.
So it may be somewhere that Putin's thinking, well, listen, I can see if I can flog my oil or route my oil and gas through Azerbaijan, and they can flog it.
Yeah, hide it in their market
or something like this. Yeah. But none of this looks good internationally. My hype now, and there's one more piece of information, which is there is talk about some kind of peace talks happening in Qatar, and Putin pulling out of them because of the Ukrainian special military operation. And I put a bit of money on this. I mean, this, do I know for any of this for a fact? No. But I put a fiver on these talks being real because I feel and sense the exhaustion here in Ukraine. So I think Ukraine, they're never going to sign a peace deal with Russia, signing away places like Mariupol or Donetsk. They're not going to, or Crimea. They're not going to do that. However, a thing where the war stops, you have a North Korea, South Korea thing, and the fighting stops. Part of me can imagine that happening, and then
a DMZ, as it were,
a kind of DMZ, no peace deal, and if Zelensky signs a peace deal, somebody will kill him. I think his life will be in danger. No peace deal, but an effective kind of stopping of the killing. Now, suddenly, the Ukrainians, having got a chunk of Russia, and the way they've done it, it looks as though they could hold it. I think they can hold this for a long time. And one of my friend who's been there on holiday without the passport says, no, we're gonna hold it. And it's clear it's not they're not holding it because it is not part of Ukraine's military strategy to invade Russia. They're holding it because Russia has invaded Ukraine, and this is a swap.
It's a means to an end.
Yes.
Well, one of the other things that indicates that to me as well is that when I saw a video that that kind of went viral of Ukrainian soldiers going into supermarkets and kind of grabbing foodstuffs and kind of foraging, and I mentioned this to a friend that I have in a contact that I have in Ukraine's military, and they kind of said, no, our supply chain is fine. We knew exactly what we were doing. Our soldiers are well fed,
they were
well supplied. They didn't anticipate that Russia would abandon their citizens and not leave them with means to have support, like pensioners and what have you.
Yes.
So those soldiers weren't foraging for, or going in and taking that food for themselves. They were taking it because they suddenly had,
a local food crisis.
Food, crisis that they had to then feed people.
This is a problem of imperialism. I just say to it. One of the other things I was joking with some Ukrainian pals in the Buena Vista late one night was just they were talking about how lots of people there in Kursk and also Belgorod they speak Ukrainian.
Yes, I heard that too.
Yes. Yeah, and there's an old lady in sticks who
surprised.
Talks
they were surprised. The Ukrainian armed forces are surprised. They're being met with Ukrainian speakers.
Yeah, and then it was late and a drink had been taken, and I said, "So yes, I think Vladivostok is Ukrainian too, but please." Don't invade Alaska. That's going to be complicated. But
I'd rather have Ukrainians in Alaska, maybe perhaps, than some of the nutters that are up there. But I think I've probably pissed off some of my Alaskan audience, but I'll live with it. Look, mate. Generally, real 10,000 feet looking down, kind of abstract. Where do we go? What's the situation and where are we headed?
So as I said before, Western timidity, in particular for the Biden White House, and also the Trump problem that Trump is batting for Team Kremlin, means it's very difficult to call this or to call the next step until we know who's won the American election. It looks as though Kamala and the wonderful Mr. Walz, they have momentum, and it looks as though they're going to win. But it's a massive worry. But I think Biden and the West Wing are worried about helping the Ukrainians too much, which leads to some kind of
you and I have discussed this
Russian escalation.
Yes, which then could be turned into propaganda for the Trump team.
So they are so afraid of Trump using a Russian success against them that they don't want to risk the Ukrainian helping Ukraine too much.
As much as it devastates me to think about a Ukrainian soldier dying today or tomorrow because of American domestic politics, it's still very true, in my opinion, that we got to get Trump in the rearview mirror once he is no longer a threat. Because a second term with Trump, and in particular also Vance, who has been outspoken in his desire to abandon Ukraine. If they get in, it's going to be far worse for Ukraine. So as horrible as it is to think of Ukrainian soldiers, again, dying because of American domestic politics, we got to get November behind us. And then once we get November behind us, perhaps the Americans can be better allies.
I remember, but I think that Walz will be better, but I don't think the Harris administration will change the dial that much, because the Americans are traumatized by the experience of Iraq. They do not want an Iraq 2.0. What they're specifically worried about is Ukrainian victory leads to Russian chaos, and Russian chaos means, for example, the Islamists in Chechnya, Dagestan get hold of a
South Caucasus,
get hold of a nuclear
Caucasus,
weapon, or the Chinese take Siberia, and then China suddenly becomes overnight the world's richest and the world's largest country. And these are real fears inside the West Wing. And I think Biden has lived through the Cold War and has a greater fear of nuclear war than is sensible, but he's a man of his time. He's an old man, but he's a man of his time.
Yeah.
So, by the way, what this means is that I think that the war finishes when one of the two sides kind of disintegrates. And I'd put serious money on Ukraine not disintegrating. It can get significantly smaller, but it will still fight. It still has a meaning and purpose.
It could lose the land bridge. It could lose Donbass. But if it doesn't lose Odessa in particular and access to the Black Sea, and it isn't decapitated in Kiev, it's a major victory. There will be a nation called Ukraine.
Yes. I mean, I think I'm talking to my friend that even if we lose Kiev, it's not the end.
We'll keep fighting.
But Russia is different. I think that the Wizard of Moscow, as perhaps we should now call him, this silly fool, I think he's been very badly exposed.
No, he doesn't survive this.
And I can't see them getting Kursk back in particular. Actually, weirdly, it's a spot to the left of what they're currently occupying is easier to hold than what they've currently got.
Yes.
I can't see Putin surviving a war inside Russia, given all the pressures on him, in particular, if I'm right in divining this, pressure from the Chinese to settle, because this war isn't helping the world economy and it's not actually helping tyrants or us. And there's a moment at which you look at this and think, you know what? If the Chinese really want to take Taiwan, it's beginning to become irritating that the Russians are so ineffectual.
Well, and in addition to that, not for nothing, but Putin is going to hate dealing with Harris. He hates women in general and a woman of color. I mean, if you think Trump can't handle a woman of color, Putin will lose his mind having to deal with her. And she could take a hard stance with him. I mean, if the Iron Lady had to have the Falklands, Harris could conclude this war, and it's possible.
I think
and
also
that would be a feather in her cap.
But also the other thing is
not that I want to equate Kamala Harris with Maggie Thatcher, but
no, she's
but a strong woman sometimes has to show she's a harder bitch than all the men around her, which I think is almost a direct quote from Thatcher.
Yes. So, but there's also a thing of American domestic politics has been, while Trump's been around, has been an enemy of Ukrainian success. But if you're anti-Trump, as Kamala and Waltz really are, then there's a moment when you say, okay, let's go get Putin. Let's go, let's
finish this thing.
Let's give him a smack.
Yeah.
Because it proves Trump wrong about Putin for good. Mm-hmm. And so that's, now I think they're umming and ahhing, but I think fear of chaos, I certainly think that's the State Department, the view from Foggy Bottom is don't risk it for the biscuit. And I think that general, rather timid conservatism will hold sway in Washington. But the pressures on Putin don't go away. And I feel that I can see Russia splintering. And it's a
Well,
great...
because he's made a whole society that's built around him.
Yeah.
He's the center of gravity. If he disappears,
if he's gone, bang.
then
but what's
then
fascinating...
the center cannot hold.
What's fascinating about Kursk is you unplug the brainwashing and the whole thing goes.
Yes, that's true too. We've seen that quickly happening with residents of Kursk. Yeah.
And we saw it also in Rostov-on-Don when Prigozhin had his mutiny.
This is also true. That's a
So
good point,
we've seen it twice. So when my Ukrainian...
Paper tiger.
I'm not a Maoist, but it's a good quote. I think that I do feel... Anyway, I feel... there's been a lot of gloom here, and there is still a lot of gloom because so many good people are dying. But nevertheless, there is also real joy here.
Yes.
And just the moment I said to my Ukrainian pals in the Buena Vista, please don't invade Alaska.
Well, I think the worm is turning against autocracy. They've
Yes.
Whether it's Trump or whether it's Putin, either way, and I'm here for it. So look. We got to get November behind us, and we have to keep the pressure on Putin by means of hitting him where he's weakest. And if that's in Kursk, then so be it. We hold on to Donetsk as much as we can. As you mentioned, it's incremental gains for them there.
But there are a ton of...
But ultimately, the die is cast.
Yes.
Russia has lost this war. They just don't know it yet.
Yes, but we've also got to do much better on sanctions. We've got, and also we've got to say to the Chinese, you cannot benefit from the international rules-based order and our market and take the piss in the way that you are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So which is it? And we say to the Indians or who else, you want to make the Apple iPhone? We're no longer pleased with the current manufacturers. Yeah. And those messages, I think, are very, very important. But yeah, I do feel
optimistic.
I do. I
know, it's a weird feeling.
Right, can I have a drink now?
Yes, you can. John Sweeney, thank you for joining us on The Edge. We'll do the obligatory John Sweeney sign-off to this camera, shall we?
Yes.
Sasha, this camera. We're going to talk to this camera here. Shall we do a countdown, old John, old boy?
So
3,
2, 1.
Vladimir Putin, do fuck off. Thank you for joining us, John.